Hello, everyone. Let's get started with today's webinar. We're going to be covering advanced configuration of the 245 and the 945 Ethernet radios and some troubleshooting techniques to optimize the throughput. Okay, so just a quickly introduction here. This is the L-Pro Technologies radio portfolio. And the products we're going to be talking about today are these three devices right here. These are our Ethernet pass-through modems, and they transparently bridge two Ethernet pieces of equipment together. So they are the 945 U-E, which is a 900 megahertz radio. Then we have our 2.4 gigahertz equivalent, and then we have our 5 gigahertz equivalent. All three radios have very similar settings. The only differences would just be in the frequency channels that you can set these three radios for. This is the example that we're going to be illustrating today. And today's session will consist of two parts. The first part is the PowerPoint, where I'm going to explain the theory behind some of the parameters that we'll be talking about. And the second part is I have two radios that are powered on, and we're going to walk through the configuration menus and do some throughput testing while changing some of these parameters. With the 945 U-E, the maximum distance is going to be approximately 9 miles. With the 2.4 gigahertz equivalent radio, the maximum distance approximately 6 miles, and with the 5 gigahertz version, approximate 3-mile maximum distance. Now, the distances will vary depending on the antennas, the terrain, how high you mount them above ground, the background noise. So there's a couple of different parameters that will influence the total distance. But in a nutshell, we've got some equipment over here, which is Ethernet based. And now this could be a video camera. This could be a corporate network. This could be any type of Ethernet based equipment. The radios are not concerned with what protocol is being sent over the air, as long as it is in standard 802.11 based protocol. I summarize it as if the information can go over the internet, then it can go through our radios. And here we have our master station with our computer connected to an access point radio. Now, today's webinar is designed as a follow-up to last week's session. So last week, or the last session 2 weeks ago, we talked about how to set up two radios to form this basic bridge. And now we're going to go into the advanced configuration to optimize and maximize throughput. So the first thing to think about is the parameters that affect the throughput. The number one parameter is the RSSI, the received signal strength indication. And that can be seen in the connectivity menu of a radio. The stronger the RSSI, the faster modulation technique that it can use. So these radios are multi-rate radios. They have throughputs that vary all the way down to as low as 250 kilobits per second, all the way up to 54 megabits per second. And what they do is they use different modulation techniques and different amounts of forward error correction. And the slower the modulation technique and the more forward error correction that is utilized, the less throughput is available for our for the end user, or for the video camera, or for the PLC, or whatnot. So as a rule of thumb, if we have negative 70 dBm or stronger, that'll give you the fastest possible speeds. Below negative 70, and the radio starts to drop down and use different modulation schemes. If we use one of the narrower channels, like a 5 megahertz wide channel, a 2.5, or maybe even just a 1.25 megahertz wide channel, we need to have an RSSI of roughly negative 80 dBm as a minimum. Otherwise, the radio will begin to drop down and use slower and slower modulation techniques. So that's the number one parameter. And honestly, the way to improve the RSSI is to use higher gain antennas, mount the antennas higher above ground so that there is more Fresnel zone clearance. and use as little coax cable as possible to minimize cable losses. Okay. The next factor is the channel width. Wider channels give higher speeds. So with a 20 megahertz wide channel, we're going to get about 4 times the speed that we would get with a 5 megahertz channel. But there are some big trade-offs that we will talk about here. The number one trade-off with a wider channel is clear channel assessment is done over a much wider bandwidth. And clear channel assessment, what it is the radio listens for other devices that may be transmitting on the same frequency. And if they are transmitting, the radio waits until those other devices are finished transmitting. Otherwise, this radio would just simply generate more interference, and both radios would not get their communications through, and both radios would probably do retries and further increase interference levels. So, as a result, we refer to these radios as being very polite. They will wait until somebody else is finished talking before they begin to transmit their messages. So if you have a wider frequency channel, it means this clear channel assessment is done over a wider bandwidth. And that means that it may lead to a possibly a lower duty cycle. Okay, so channel width. There is some trade-offs going with the wider channels. Generally, I've found the 10 megahertz wide channel is about as wide as is practical. Of course, if you're in a remote environment where there is no other radios, no other interference sources nearby, then we could get away with the 20 megahertz channel. Okay, another factor that is going to improve throughput is if we can set the fixed noise floor. And what this does is this causes the radio to ignore any weak sources of interference and thereby not allow it to affect its clear channel assessment. For example, let's say we had an RSSI of a negative 70, but we had a source of interference that was at negative 100. Well, negative 100 is so weak that it would not cause any interference to a signal that is as strong as negative 70. So therefore, the radio will, if we have this fixed noise floor, for example, if we set it to a value of negative 80, then the radio would ignore any sources of interference that are weaker than negative 80. And generally, we want an interference to be 10 dB lower than the weakest. Like negative 70, we could set the fixed noise floor to a value of negative 80. And it'll then ignore any interference weaker than negative 80. Okay, so then some of the parameters that will influence throughput, the maximum distance setting in the radio. The factory default is 20,000 meters or 20 kilometers. And what the distance setting does is it determines how long a receiving radio waits for the entire message to arrive. And if that radio does not know how far away the opposite transmitting radio is, by default, it'll have to wait a fairly substantial period of time to conclude that, yes, that was it, the last of the message has finally arrived. Now, due to the very high-speed nature of these Ethernet modems, it can be very significant. So, for example, if we have an application where the distance is less than 1,000 meters, we could see an improvement of up to 30% in throughput. So that's that's a pretty substantial improvement. Now, the most important thing in setting the maximum distance here is that we make sure we set it slightly greater than the actual distance. Because if we set this to a value of, say, 900 meters, and the actual distance was 1,000 meters between the two radios, then every time this radio, the sending radio sent a message, the receiving radio would truncate the last portion of the message. So in other words, the radios will not link up if the maximum distance is set to a value that is less than the actual distance between the two radios. So if we had a distance of about 1,000 meters, I would enter a small fudge factor. I would set it to 1,100 meters. So add a small fudge factor just to make sure we don't make them a small mistake and cause the radio to lose light. Another parameter that will speed up throughput is after you have completed any throughput testing, turn off the iPerf server. This will improve throughput by anywhere from 10 to 25% because of the reduced load on the radio's microprocessor. So the iPerf server is what we use to do throughput testing, and I'll be doing that in just a minute. This chart here illustrates what I was just explaining in the past couple of slides. This shows you the throughput that you'll get with some different distance settings on the radio, as well as if you use our internal iPerf server versus an external iPerf server. Like, for example, if I had two computers and I have iPerf server on one computer and then the iPerf client on the opposite computer, I could get higher throughput because I'm not bogging down the microprocessor with managing this iPerf task. So you can see if we go with an external iPerf server, that's a huge bump in throughput, going from 10.5 to 16 megabits per second. So big jump in throughput can be obtained here. Now, if we select one of the narrower channels, the difference in throughput is quite a bit less. Okay. Now, we have all these different channel widths available here, and you can see we have different throughputs associated with each channel. So generally, I say it usually drops in half. It's not quite half, but you can see the throughput does drop quite a bit as you get narrower and narrower channels. Okay. You can also see the effect of the distance setting here. We go from, if we have it set to 10,000 meters, we have approximately 10 megabits per second of available throughput. Drop that down to 1,000 meters, and now we have approximately 60 megabits per second. And again, if you look at the far end of this table here, look at the narrower channels, the difference is a lot smaller. So it's mainly with the wider channels that we're going to see really big improvements in performance by changing our distance setting. Okay, one of the other parameters is that we're going to illustrate today is how to use the channel survey in troubleshooting. So the channel survey combines 3 different parameters and shows you how busy that frequency channel was. So this is looking at whatever frequency channel that you selected, like I think I have these radios set to channel 15, which is centered on 907 megahertz, and it is 2.5 megahertz wide. So looking at just that portion of the spectrum, this is how busy it was for this particular period of time. And what it consists of is it shows you a combination of all 3 parameters. The time the radio spent transmitting data, the time the radio spent receiving data, and the time spent that the radio backed off due to clear channel assessment. So all 3 parameters are combined into one single graph when we select channel survey right here in our software menu. Okay. Now keep in mind, if you power cycle the radio or you reset the radio after making a parameter change, this information is lost. It is discarded and the timer resets from 0. So there's 3 time intervals. We can show performance over the past 60 seconds, the past 60 minutes, and the past 60 hours. And what we are looking for is, you can see this goes from 0% at the bottom up to 100%. We are looking for a channel utilization of less than 80%. If the channel utilization is above 80%, that means that there's either too much data is being jammed through this radio network, so we can maybe use a wider channel or try to improve the RSSI, or it could be that the radio spent a lot of time backing off due to interference, and we have some techniques we can deal with that as well. Then we're also going to show you a little later on in the hands-on session here is how to use the custom survey. So the custom survey is right here, and it is a breakdown of the channel survey. So it allows us to select any of these three parameters and plot them on separate graphs. And this allows you to plot each one by one. So I can see how often the radio is transmitting, how often it's receiving, and how often it is busy due to clear channel assessment. And if one of these three parameters is excessively high, there are things that we can do. For example, if we have very high radio transmit, it means that this radio just needs more bandwidth. So we could use a wider frequency channel. Or we could do one of the other settings, like turn off the iPerf server or some of the other things we discussed a few minutes ago. If the radio shows very high receive, it also means that we need to improve the bandwidth, often using a wider channel or improving the RSSI. But if we have a point-to-point radio link, the transmit and receive values on opposite radios should be the same, because whatever is transmitted has to be received. However, your access point radio could be communicating to 10 or 15 different remote radios. If so, it's probably going to be receiving a lot more data than it is transmitting. So you could see some differences between access point and access point and client radios. And if we see we have very high clear channel assessment, or if we plot this parameter right here by itself, and we see it is occupying maybe 20 or 30 or 40% of our total bandwidth, then we know that we need to deal with interference or noise. And the best way is to use our fixed noise floor, because it's a very easy setting. You can just set it on the radio as a software setting, or relocate the antennas. We have an antenna separation chart that shows how far each antenna should be mounted from other antennas based on their frequency. Okay, so now for the live portion. Now, if you're doing this, following this from home, this is a super quick background here. You have to have the radio set to run mode so that the RF module is powered on, and that is by this dip switch right here. We have run versus setup mode. And in setup mode, you can access it by this IP address if you've forgotten what the IP address is. In run mode, it's accessed by the user's IP address that you would have entered. Okay. Once you have the radios linked up, we need to make sure these three LEDs are on. First of all, the OK LED has to be solid green. That indicates the radio is fully booted up and has a good power source. The TX Link LED should be solid yellow, green. My apologies, should be green. In this picture, it looks like it's yellow. It's actually green when I look at the radios that I have sitting here in front of me. And then the last one is this LAN LED should be amber or yellow. And that indicates that you have an Ethernet cable plugged into a computer that is powered on. And at the same time, you should see these yellow and green LEDs on the Ethernet port as well. They should be on or flashed. Okay, so we got to make sure some LEDs are on the radio. Then we have to make sure that your laptop is set to an IP address that is the same as the radio's subnet. But it has to be different from all radios. So my two radios are 192.168.0.135 and 162. And so therefore I've set my computer to .5. Okay. Okay, so then you need to run a browser. I use Firefox. It seems to work very well. What you do is you just type in the IP address of the radio. No HTTP or no www in front of it. Firefox inserted this automatically. This will go away as soon as we get to the page. Now, it'll always pop up with these security certificate warnings that the company is currently working on. And until we have those security certificates in the radio, you'll see this little warning message pop up. just click on Advanced down here. Then you'll see the full menu. Scroll down a little bit, and then you click Accept the Risk and Continue. Then it will ask you for the user and password. The default is user and user, all lowercase. Okay. Now we're finished with the PowerPoint portion of this. So I've got two radios here. They are powered up. We're going to head over here and log into one of the radios. Okay. Now these radios right now, they're approximately, they're about 2 feet apart. I have small width antennas connected, but I also have 20 dB attenuators connected in series with the antenna. So we have to have those antennas connected because these radios are so close together, otherwise they would saturate. Now I have an Ethernet cable plugged into just one of the radios. The other radio I am pulling up over the air. So because we have these radios linked up, I can just plug into one radio and pull up all of the configuration menus of the opposite radio over the air. Okay. Now let's see here. I wanted to check and make sure I'm logged into the access point radio. I am. So I'm all set up here. And the access point radio is the one that determines what frequency channel we are set to. So in this case, it tells me that the frequency channel is channel 15, centered on 907 megahertz, and it is 2.5 megahertz wide, and we number this channel. It's called channel number 15. Okay? We have all kinds of different frequency channels here that we can choose from, and I've left the transmit power at the radio's maximum, which is 28 dBm. Now, when you see something in brackets, when it says AP only, it means that this parameter applies to access point radios only. So it will have no effect on the client radio. Okay, now I'm going to head over to my client radio. We'll head to the radio tab. And for the client radio, I have set it to auto. So it is going to scan for any frequency channel that the access point may be set to. And this is very convenient for changing frequency. So now you can see I've got the maximum distance setting is set for 20,000 meters. And I'm going to head over to my connectivity menu. And we'll see what the RSSI is on this radio. Okay. So this is showing the RSSI is negative 56. So that is in our sweet spot for these radios. We generally want the RSSI to be no stronger than negative 40 dBm and no weaker than negative 70 dBm. Now that said, we can operate these radios at negative 80 all the way up to negative 90, as well as we can have some super strong signals down to about negative 30. So the radios will operate outside of our sweet spot, but with lower throughput. Okay. Now I'm going to head to my opposite radio. We're going to go to the connectivity menu, and we're just going to see what the RSSI is here. Okay, it's negative 57. So both radios are within 1 dB, which is what we would expect. In fact, the measurement error of the RSSI is generally plus or minus 3 dB. So if we have this radio at negative 57, the other radio's RSSI could be anywhere from negative 51 up to, what is 7 plus 6, negative 63. And that would be considered acceptable within the margin of these radios. But generally, they should be the same on each radio, or roughly the same. Okay, we have some other information in our connectivity menu. We have the IP address of the opposite radio. We have just a numerical counter. This is the associated ID, and each client would just be showing up as ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It just counts up in that fashion. This is our frequency channel, channel number 15. This is the current modulation data rate that we're able to get with our 2.5 megahertz wide channel, 6.75 megabits per second of raw throughput. So raw throughput is different from user throughput. Raw throughput includes all the overhead. So all the beacon messages, all the back and forth traffic that occurs in the background, that chews up a fair bit of overhead in this type of radio. Then we have our signal strength, the received signal strength. Then we have our background noise of negative 99. So this is just a very broad parameter. Trying to put background noise into a single number is a very difficult thing to do because there's things like duty cycle. What if it was super powerful, but just for milliseconds? Or what if it were only over a narrow slice of spectrum, but we're looking at a much wider, a 2.5 megahertz portion of the spectrum? So this background noise is just a very broad generalization. It should not be considered terribly accurate for for RF analysis purposes. So we have our two radios all set up, and let's see. I have my iPerf server enabled on. Let's see here. I think I'll head back and just go double check that. We'll head to the radio page, and then we go to advanced radio configuration to make sure that we have the iPerf server enabled. And note that I have not set my fixed noise floor. So now I can go to my throughput test, and I would type in the IP address. Oh, sorry, I have to go to the throughput test on this radio here. Go to throughput test, and then I type in the IP address of the opposite radio. Let's see, that was 135. Okay. So then we hit, oh, I think I have got that backwards. Let's just double check that. Oh, I've mixed this up because you can see it's quite easy to get these tabs mixed up. So I'm going to head over here and double check. Okay, so it is 162 that has the iPerf server enabled onto it. And the radio I'm logged into right now is 135. So I go ahead and hit 162 and click on measure throughput. And now it is, or it should be performing the throughput tester. Okay. And, oh, I think I made a mistake here because this is showing throughput of 70 megabits per second. But that is not possible with the going over the radio link. We would expect throughput of approximately 3 megabits per second. So let's just double check this and see where we have made the mistake. This radio, let's go to its network page. Okay. Yep, we are logged into radio 162. Okay. And this radio over here, let's go to its network page. And it is also showing me an IP address of 162, which should not be correct. Okay. Just bear with me for a minute here. Let's head over to this guy here. Oh, I wonder if we have opened up the same radio in two different pages. I think we might have here. So, okay, we'll exit this radio tab here. We'll start up a new tab. We'll type 192.168.0.135. Oh, here we go. I had opened up two tabs on the same radio. Okay, so now when I head over to this one here, now I'm logged into radio 135. Okay, so you can see sometimes you can make a little mistake here and there, and that can cause some confusion. But if you see 70 megabits per second, you've done the iPerf test on the radio you're directly plugged into. So here we go, 192.168.0.162. Okay? And we go ahead and click measure throughput. Now, when I look at the radios, I can see the TX and RX LEDs are flickering rapidly. That tells me the iPerf server is doing its thing. It's creating traffic and jamming it through the radio. And now we can see what our throughput is. Here we go. This is what we're expecting. So now we've got throughput of 2.3 megabits per second. Okay? So I'm going to head back over to my access point radio. I'm going to click on the radio tab. And what we will do is we will change that frequency channel from a 2.5 megahertz channel to a 5 megahertz wide frequency channel. I'm going to hit Save Changes and Reset, and that will cause the radio to reboot with the new parameter of the 5 megahertz wide channel. Now, this countdown timer here, this is just an estimate. They estimated roughly about 75 seconds for the radio to boot up. It is not connected. My browser is not connected to the radio right now because the radio is undergoing a boot cycle. So the so this is just estimating when the radio will be finished booting up. Now I know it does not take the full 75 seconds. It only takes about 60 seconds. So I'm going to get this guy ready. I'm looking at the LED of that radio. It is still flashing red and green, indicating it's going through its boot cycle. And, oh, there we go. It's solid green already, and we had 18 seconds left over here. And I can see it's already reestablished the radio. Okay. So what we will do now is we will head back to this radio here. We will repeat that throughput test now that we have set the radios to the 5 megahertz wide channel. Okay. Okay, so we have, oh, there we go. We just finished our 10-second throughput test. And now it's showing me I only got a slight improvement. I only got 3.24 megabits per second, when I would probably expect something a little faster than that. So I'm going to repeat the test because it is only sampling over a 10-second interval. So usually I would repeat this test 3 or 4 times to get an average value. And okay, looks like it's still showing roughly 3.11 megabits per second. So what we can do next is let's change our distance setting for these radios. Okay. So we have the maximum distance here. It is set for 2,000 meters. Let's see. I'm going to head over to my access point radio because I am connected over the air. We're going to head to the network page to make sure I've got the right radio that I'm connected to. We'll head to the radio tab, and I'm going to change that maximum distance setting down to the lowest possible value of 300 meters. Okay, we'll hit Save Changes and Reset. And now I'm going to head back to the opposite radio. And I'm also going to set it to 300 meters. And we'll hit Save Changes and Reset. We'll give these radios a minute to reboot and reestablish the radio link. And then we can repeat our throughput test. Okay. Now, while we're on this page here, we have 2 additional parameters. We have the transmit data rate, which is for user data, and then we have the basic rate, which is for beacon intervals. and overhead of the radio network. Okay, I generally do not change these parameters. I leave the transmit data rate set to auto, and the radio can figure out how fast or what throughput is available. And if the RSSI is nice and strong and it can get that really high throughput, then we can be quite successful with that. Okay, it looks like our two radios have finished booting up. So let's head back into this guy here. And let's repeat that throughput test. Okay, so we have our, I have to hit the enter key after I got it. There we go. Okay, so let's just double check our radios, make sure we have them connected together. We do. The RSSI shows to be -50. So let's head to our throughput test and give that another try. And let's see what difference the maximum distance setting has made. Okay, so we typed in the IP address of the opposite radio. When I click measure throughput, I can see the TX and RX LEDs are flipping rapidly as it goes ahead and does the test. And let's see what kind of results we got here. Okay, look at this. We went from 3.1 megabits per second to 4.9 megabits per second. So the maximum distance, as you can see, really does have a very substantial effect on the throughput of the radios. Now let's head over to our channel survey, and let's see how busy this frequency channel was for the past little bit here. Now, because we have reset this radio a couple of times, we won't have any history for the longer periods. We won't have anything for the 1 hour intervals. So we're going to look at the last 60 seconds, and we can see this is when we did the iPerf test. Now, this is showing the combination of transmit, receive, and clear channel assessment. So over here, I can look at each parameter one at a time. So I'll start by looking at these two guys right here. And when I hit save changes, it redraws these parameters. So, looks like I missed it for the past 60 seconds there. But you can see, basically, unless I'm sticking data into this radio, it's not transmitting. And this guy is periodically receiving information. That would just be the beacons that are coming across some of the overhead. So we can see this utilization was very, very low. Okay. Now I'm going to head back and do another throughput test and see if I can very quickly jump back to these channel surveys so that we can see some live data a little more easily. Okay, we typed in the IP address of the opposite radio. It's going ahead. We see the TX and RX LEDs are flicking rapidly. And let's see our throughput, 4.8 megabits per second. So looks like it was quite successful there. Let's head to our custom survey. And we've got our values plotted right there. And here we go. We can see that this radio was, we can see it's quite busy doing its transmitting. We see there's only a little bit of receive activity on this radio. The other parameter to look at here is our clear channel assessment. And let's see how often it was busy due to clear channel assessment. And here we can see it was a little bit busy. It was spent maybe, call that maybe 10% of its time due to clear channel assessment. So that means that there is some other 900 megahertz radio in the area. Very likely it is the power meter, the smart meter on the outside of my house. I know it is a 900 megahertz frequency hopper installed by my electrical utility. It's quite possible there could be some 900 megahertz SCADA systems as well for the water utility in my city. So this gives you some ideas as to what parameters are impacting your throughput. Now, the last parameter that I wanted to go ahead and set and test on these radios is the fixed noise floor. And what I will do is, remember the RSSI was -50 on this radio here. Okay, so I'm logging into the access point first because I'm plugged into the client, and as soon as I reboot the access point, we'll lose link with the client. Okay, so we're going to click on the radio tab. We go to advanced radio configuration. The RSSI was -50, so we're going to set this value to -60. Okay, we'll go ahead and hit save changes and reset. Then we're going to head over to this radio here, and we're going to do the same thing. Okay, and save changes and reset. Okay, it's important that you do that in the correct order, starting with the radio that you are connected to over the air. So what you have to do first is change the parameter on the remote radio over the air, then it'll reboot, then go to the radio that you have your Ethernet cable plugged directly into. Okay, so let's see, we'll just have to wait another few seconds for these radios to finish booting up. And then we can retry the iPerf server test and measure the throughput and see how well we see how much of an improvement we got due to fixing the noise floor. Okay, so let's go ahead and get ourselves ready for when this guy finishes booting up. And yeah, looks like he's all finished. Okay. So again, this is just an estimate as to how long. Okay, let's see, 192.168.135. I hope we typed in that IP address correctly. Okay, let's see. Oh, there we go. Yep, we sure have. And I'm just going to double check this. Yep, so we're logged into 162 and 135. So I'm just checking to make sure I did not make the same mistake I made earlier by logging into the same radio with two separate tabs. Okay, so let's head over to our connectivity. We'll just double check what the RSSI is, -51, so that's right in our sweet spot. Note that the background noise now shows -60, and that is because we set the fixed noise floor to a value of -60, so it can't measure anything weaker than -60 dBm. We're going to head over to the throughput test. We type in the IP address 192.168.0.162 of the opposite radio. Click measure throughput. I can see the LEDs are flickering rapidly. TX and RX LEDs, so it is performing the test. And let's see what kind of results we got. Oh wow, we actually got slightly lower results. So let's just give that one more try. We would expect the results to improve a very slight amount. And the reason it is not improving significantly is because these radios are indoors. And oh, interesting, it's actually dropped down to 3.69 megabits per second. I'm wondering if the RSSI might be bouncing around a little bit. This is generally not what we would expect. We would expect higher throughput, but with these attenuators and these radios being so close together, we may not see much of an improvement simply because there probably isn't much interference that's making its way from the outside of my building into this into my office here. So let's. I'm going to try that just one more time, and then we're going to head over to our custom survey, and let's go see how busy the this network was. So there we go. Slight improvement, but really about the same as before. But let's head over to the custom survey and have a look at our values and see what we got. Okay, we can see it was, this one is showing all three parameters here, so you can see it's fairly busy, but let's get rid of those two parameters and let's just see what it's doing there. Okay, we can see that's showing transmit and receive. And the last one I want to show is the clear channel and see how much time it spent waiting. So here we go. Looks like it spent maybe 5% of its, it says, well, over the past 60 seconds, it was 1%, but for our throughput test here, it did not really spend much time backing off at all due to interference. So I hope that gives you a rough idea as to how to improve the throughput. The last one would be to disable the iPerf server. But these are going to be the most important menus that you'll utilize to see how a radio network is performing. Virtually all of the other ones, like the statistics one, well, there's going to be a problem that you're going to have in the network. Like you're going to notice your PLCs aren't communicating before you would go to the statistics to confirm that the radios aren't communicating, for example. So this is where we want to have a look at our channel surveys and our custom survey and see how busy this network is. Okay? So in summary here, we're just concluding this webinar in the next minute or two. If the radio has very high transmit, a percent transmit is extremely high. That means that either the radio spent a lot of time doing retries because it could not get a message back from the opposite radio, or we need to use a wider channel because we're just jamming more data through this radio than the channel has available. If the radio has a percent receive, I should say, if the percent radio RX is extremely high, then we need to also look at a wider frequency channel or possibly improving the RSSI by boosting antenna gain or increasing the mounting height of the antenna. Very similar to when we have high volume radio transmit. And the last one is if the percent busy due to clear channel assessment or noise, if this is fairly high, then we can fix that by setting the radio's fixed noise floor. Okay, I think that's it for today's webinar here. And just wanted to thank you all for listening. I hope you found this very informative. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me